And it was because the big cities of Denver, Colorado, as well as downstream another state in New Mexico and Albuquerque, as well as El Paso, there were lots of threats to basically take away the water from the valley. And if that would have happened, the agricultural economy would dry up because there would have been no water there. And many of the conservation values, which the Nature Conservancy is very involved with us down in the valley, they were wanting to protect those conservation values. And so there was, in fact, a coming together of the rural and agricultural interests, the county commissioners, and the environmental communities, to put together a program to save and protect the water of the San Luis Valley forever. Okay, now, this is a fight that's been going on for 50 years, and lots of money spent on litigation, and lots of blood on the floor over this battle. And what ended up happening is that there was a creation of essentially a program that ended up making a national park out of the Great Sand Dunes, which became one of the most recent additions to the national parks, thanks to the Nature Conservancy and land and water conservation groups that were very involved with us. At the same time, the ranching and agricultural communities, the water districts, the Rio Grande River Water Conservation District and others, were very supportive of that effort because they knew that if we had a national park in that area, that we'd basically be able to protect the water of the valley forever. And if we're able to protect the water in the valley, we'd be able to protect agriculture and the agricultural economy. And so today, people in my valley are getting along very well. Okay? Now, I don't know whether we have that same possibility here in Southern Oregon, but I think that there is some hope that we do. In my conversations with Congressman DeFazio, we're having a conversation about how we ought to move forward. So what we really need is to get the interests together and to take a look at not a year-by-year reaction to what we're doing, but to come up with a 20-year plan on how we're going to move forward with both timbering as well as with conservation. What we need to do, he says, is we need to take the recommendations from Dr. Johnson and Dr. Franklin. We ought to be able to go out and we got to identify at least 2 pilot projects that we know can be, you can timber them in an appropriate way and protect some of the older trees. We ought to be able to do that. We ought not to wait for another year or a year and a half to be able to do those kinds of pilot projects. And I've heard lots of other concerns that have been raised that I think are appropriate for the BLM and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Secretary of Interior to deal with. For example, the barred owl. We know that notwithstanding the Herculean efforts of the last 20 years, that you have the spotted owl still in decline. Well, we have an invasive species, okay, that needs to be recognized and needs to be dealt with as we move forward. So you get into those kinds of issues when you start pulling this thing apart and saying how to move forward. So here's what I wanted to have a conversation with you all on. And that is, I am impressed, frankly, with the recommendations that Congressman DeFazio has made and Senator Berkeley as well this morning as I talked to them. And so at their invitation and at their request, what I would like to do is to invite all of you to come to Washington, to meet with me, to meet with the director of the BLM, to meet with the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the assistant secretaries who oversee them. And I would bring the local officials from both BLM and Fish and Wildlife to also be a part of that meeting. And because of the NOAA influence on some of these issues, I would also have somebody from Secretary Locke come into that meeting. And let's see how we can move this agenda forward, okay? Maybe we can do that even mid-November. Okay, I'd be happy to do that as soon as we possibly can because there are things that are happening, including the recovery plan on the spotted owl that is not too far off, and I think it would be important to have your input before we get to the finalization of some of those documents. So I would invite you to come back, and I would say that in order for us to have a more substantive and productive meeting, you might want to spend a day, okay? And I join you for at least part of that day, but I would bring in the people that I just spoke about. Maybe what we ought to do is to use this paper, which I had not seen. I heard about the good doctors, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Franklin, and the work that you've been doing over the years. I've heard from Michael Bean. Some of you may know Michael Bean here. We work with him. And I said, well, who's like the most respected people that can help us figure out how to tackle this very difficult issue? He said, well, there's a Johnson and there's a Franklin. And so Jerry Franklin, Michael Bean, who I think is one of the smartest men on the planet, has said, you know, people, they have credibility, so maybe they can come up with a good way forward. So that's why I asked the timber request, well, what do you think about this plan, which I have not reviewed until this morning. Okay, I heard the comments from all of the environmental community as well. There's some really good ideas that are included in the draft paper that has been put together. So I would say that, you know, an item on the agenda for us would be to spend a good deal of time looking over this paper and to develop action items around each one of these issues that are included in here. And I would have, if I can borrow Dr. Johnson and Dr. Franklin, to have you work with, I will assign 2 people to work with you so that we're ready for this meeting. And it will be the director of BLM, Bob Abbey, and it will be the special person that I have dealing with these issues, Michael Bean, who's very familiar. So 2 people. So you don't have a crowd of 6 million people trying to pull together 3 days. And then you come, and all of us, okay? So environmentalists, conservationists, local tribe, county commissioners, timber. Let's have another meeting just like this, okay? And let's hear from you, and let's hear from the BLM, and let's hear from Michael Bean, and let's hear from my director of the Fish and Wildlife Service about how we might be able to move forward with some of this plan. Some of it seems to me to be not all that difficult. For example, when you all speak about, in one of your paragraphs here, about coming up with 2 pilot areas where we could actually go forward and identify those pilot areas to be able to move forward with a harvest heat program that is sensitive to the ecosystem. That doesn't seem to me to be all that difficult. And I heard from some of you in the conservation community over here, well, you know, when we think about the protection of rivers and the ecological values of rivers, well, you don't want to be timbering right next to the river or right in the riparian areas or in places that are very slopey. I mean, good timber practices, as I've come to understand them, actually would want to achieve that same objective. Okay, that there are areas that are special that you want to protect. On the other hand, there may be some areas where there has already been significant timbering, and you have the roadways. They're not as close to some of the riparian areas as other areas. But those would be appropriate for timbering. So I don't know the exact way out, but I do know what Congressman DeFazio has and Senator Murphy have convinced me of is that the paralysis of the past and the paralysis of the present is not the way forward. That we need to find a new way forward. And I don't have the answer today, but I think that the dialogue that has been initiated here this morning can be, if you will, a framework for additional discussions to try to get us to a real way forward. Now, let me also say something else. When I was a U.S. Senator, in my previous slide for my state of Colorado, I had a sign on my desk. I had a couple things that I always remember, but I still have these signs. One that says, "No farms, no food." And that's because as a farmer, I recognize the importance of the food security of our country. But another sign that I had that my press secretary, then Cody Wirtz, used to have, Kendra, in fact, at his desk, was "Results matter. Results matter." And sometimes we end up in processes where I heard some of you talk about our managers ending up doing nothing but processing paper and having to focus all the time in litigation and not doing the job that has to be done in terms of managing the land. So maybe what has happened here is that we do have a paralysis and a dysfunction that Senator Merkley described as a dysfunction. And what we need to do is we need to figure out a way out of that paralysis and into the near future. So I'm willing to spend time on this and willing to figure out what best way to move forward. Our public lands are important. I manage, as Secretary of the Interior, 20% of the land mass of the United States of America. Some of the areas we manage without significant conflict. Some of them have more conflict. This is an area that has had conflict for a very long time. But I think also out of that conflict, there's some important lessons to be learned. So if you look back and say, well, what are the lessons learned in terms of how we might be able to move forward? So as you were going over this program, I was thinking, I think probably this reflects there's a lot of lessons that you've learned since you started some of this effort now some 20 years ago. So Peter, if that would be acceptable to you and Jeff, what I would do is at your request, I would be happy to host this meeting and to have that kind of a follow-up to the plan that you all have presented here this morning.
Thank you. Maybe we can get a really brief response from is Jerry Senior. Do you know? Let him?
No, Norm can speak for me any day.
Norm, what do you think of that suggestion?
Well, just a couple of things. First off, of course, Jerry and I are willing to help in any way we can. We've been working on this a long time. We are stuck, and we're running out of time, and we really want to help on this. And there are lots of, even though we have differences, there are just an enormous number of sincere people sitting around this table who want to find some solutions. So we're willing to help in any way we can.
Thank you. I'll turn to the conservation side. Andy?
It's a great half a plan. And it's very important that we work on what we can agree on in terms of restoration, where timber is a byproduct. There is volume to be had in terms of good restoration projects, and that's commercial volume. We're not afraid of it. However, I think this is a little too micro just to do this. I think we need to recognize that the world has changed, that the O&C Lands Act of 1937 has essentially been made irrelevant by the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act and public opinion. So it's a model of managing these lands whether this O&C framework is no longer valid. This would also be much, much easier if we were dealing with the Forest Service and not the Bureau of Land Management.
Okay, but we're going to try.
The last one, Peter, is you should also consider transferring these lands to the Forest Service, which is a much better managing agency, and it would do much to resolve the conflict.
Okay. I guess Doug, as the senior commissioner. Quick, we're going to be. Don't go to the disagreements. Go to the agreements.
We would absolutely accept your invitation in a very positive way. We'll provide you with this plan, which we would want to fully explore the possibilities of it in a setting as you've described. You bet we'll be there.
Okay.
We're happy to be at the table of the timber industry. You know, Southwest Oregon is in a real problem right now. We aren't getting the timber to the markets. Southwest Oregon has been managed on uneven managed stands. We don't have the plantations. We don't have the areas to go back and manage. And as I said earlier, we kind of feel like in the last 5 years or so, we've been in a state of being overlooked, and we can't afford to be a sacrifice zone any longer, so you can count on us at the table.
Not overlooked anymore. With that, I'd turn to Senator Merkley, who actually was born just a little bit south of here. So,
that's right. Thank you. I think the 3 points that you have laid out, Mr. Secretary, that is 2 pilot projects, the need to develop a 20-year plan, so very short-term vision and long-term vision, and a meeting in mid-November to drive that process forward with relevant parties is a tremendous series of steps. And so thank you for coming and listening and laying out a path of goals that we can pursue together.
Okay. And very briefly, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your very generous allotment of time to us, your attention to this problem. I think you have offered us, someone here talked about we need some leadership. You have offered, for the first time I've heard from someone in the administration in a long time, a commitment to provide some leadership and try and bring people together, find the common ground, find what we're going to disagree over, and then someone's going to have to make a judgment on how we resolve those disagreements. And I think you're the man to do that, and we're willing to work with you, and hope everyone around the table is willing to work with you on that. You know, what I would like, I think maybe, is if we can work off a common set of facts going into this. We heard on this side of the table there's a lot of timber coming off these lands. We're hearing already nothing. We'll need sort of a common set of facts brought together that are agreed upon, I think, to frame the discussion. And then, and then we need to be informed by science, and I've turned to Jerry and Norm for years. I know there are other people who say, well, there are other, yes, we're not going to exclude other scientists or other scientific opinions, but these are two people who have more experience with this region and these issues than any other scientists that I know of. And so I would hope that we would be very informed by the direction they would like to move the discussion, and whether it's, I just want to get a hard and fast commitment, because I know we're always busy, we slip, that we get it done before the end of the year, whether mid-November, maybe a little ambitious, but don't want to get too close to Christmas. So sometime between mid-November, mid-December, choose a date. We want to choose a date when Jerry can actually physically be there instead of in this body here, and get it agreed upon. With that, I would like everyone to thank you all, give all of ourselves a round of applause, but particularly the Secretary.